Good afternoon, everyone. I'm quite conscious that I stand between you and lunch, and you've been sat there quite a while, so I'll try and make it as enjoyable as possible for me and for you. Oh dear, that shouldn't have happened. This happened yesterday. Oh.
There's a theme developing here.
Yes. What I've been asked to do is to talk to you about fire sprinkler regulations in England, Scotland and Wales. And this follows on from an article which I had published in the Building Control Journal of the RICS. As a chartered quantity surveyor, I contribute on quite a regular basis to the RICS on a number of different issues. And this was seen, and it seemed to be a topic that we could discuss today. What I would like to do, though, is I've prepared this presentation, and you will no doubt have opportunity to have a look at it. And what strikes me, like, there's no point in me just regurgitating what's on the slides. So what I will do is talk about some of the areas that are of concern just now, and probably that led to the legislation as it is, and needs to be considered as we go forward. In brief, there is a difference between England, Scotland and Wales. Scotland has its own building standards, and they are, with regards to sprinklers, they are more stringent, shall we say, than in England, but not such as in Wales. Rather than go into this detail, I'll let you have a chance to look at these. But pulling out at just a few things, in Scotland, residential blocks, you should have sprinklers if it's 18 metres. In England, it's 30 metres. In Wales now, it's obviously all, because it's all domestic premises. In Scotland, it's, if you're a single-storey industrial building, it's 14,000 metres squared. In England, it's 20,000 metres squared. Why is there a difference? Well, basically, from my understanding of where we are just now, it depended on what evidence was around when these were looked at, and also what was the political will. And that's something which Nick touched on, that it depends on the politics as to how things go forward. And we await to see what happens post Dame Judith Hackett's report on. We know in the interim that the process is not fit for purpose, and that's not the best place to start from. And contributing factors towards that, I'll just bring a few into the discussion. And if I group these under change, misinformation and people. So if we talk about change, the data that we have obviously stopped in time. It's not reviewed as in America on a 3-yearly basis, which would be an ideal way, I feel, to go forward when all the stakeholders come together. And in that way, we know change. Well, the definition of life is change. If you don't have change, there's not life. So the real world is there's change. The data changes. We had the fire in Manchester, the multi-storey car park. That shouldn't have happened. The data says that should not have happened, but it did. Well, let's go with reality rather than the data, because the data is based on cars in the 1960s that had a very low flammability, but that's what designing is going forward on. So the legislation needs to take account of these, and we obviously have different building products going forward, different building materials. So again, come back to that American model of looking at it every 3 years rather than just leaving it for a while. Looking at cars as well, the size of parking spaces has had to increase. We now have hybrid cars, lithium batteries. We know there's been problems in aviation with those. What I'm saying there is that there's things, we need to be aware of things as they go forward and build them in. Our knowledge changes. One of the things that came out of the King's Cross fire was that fire goes downhill. Yeah? Up to that point, not many people thought that, but it does. It went down the escalator, and that's fact. You might say, well, it shouldn't happen, but it's fact. And it's only when we review these things, and then it needs to be thought of and built into the whole process. You may have seen last year there was some discussion about fire alarms in houses, that children might not get woken by them. That it's just not something. Children haven't learnt to associate that noise with danger and to wake up. And unless you we don't know what we don't know, unless you dig a bit deeper, and there are thoughts to change things. Fire service budgets, huge changes in those areas. We're probably all aware of constraints. Just from the West Midlands point of view, in the last 8 years, we've lost 1/3 of our budget. We are not the same force that we were 8 years ago. We cannot be. And this is across the country. You may find that your local fire station isn't there anymore. So you may need to not only think about your world, but the world around you, in the sense of we're all in that process of change. And I just raise that as an example. Misinformation, the second of the three areas. And in some ways I kind of group this in my head as confident but wrong. In that the schools minister, yes, why I've stopped on that slide is that one of the guidance which is within the building regulations for England makes reference to Building Bulletin 100, which did have, well, it does have, I should say, does have the requirement that sprinklers are considered, and they should be included, and a good reason for not including made. In 2014, the government brought out a consultation document which already had within it that requirement taken out. So that's not really consultation. They flagged up, we don't want this. And the all-party sprinkler group in Parliament have tried to find out where that came from and the timescale for the consultation. And there's no answers coming forward. And that is still causing quite a bit of confusion out in the built environment, shall we say, because we have something which is in place and a consultation document that people are confused. Where are we? Yeah. There was a debate in October 2015, allied to this consultation document, and the schools minister, Nick Gibb, gave an answer to some of the members of the all-party sprinkler group, and he said, sprinklers activate by wax melting in the mechanism. Does this sound familiar? Parallel world to me. They are therefore not an immediate fire suppression system. I thought they were, yeah. And they are not activated by smoke. Well, in the majority of cases, smoke, hot air, basically, is what does activate them. He then went on to say that in 2013 and 14, there was only one recorded case of arson in a school. All of those facts are incorrect. It's in Hansard. So how, presumably he was given information to allow him to go forward, but I just bring that to your attention, that sometimes we don't know what we don't know, but we assume maybe too much that people have the knowledge that we would hope they would have. He also went on to say that sprinklers in new schools would add about 2 to 6% to the total cost. The industry believes it's to be around 1 to 2%. So we're not on the same playing field. If the government's saying it's going to be this much, and the industry believes it's this much, well, there's a mismatch straight away. We've heard, again, Nick mentioned about Die Hard and Hollywood. I did a little bit of digging and delving, and I came up with nearly 10 films where there'd been sprinklers which had gone off as a drenching system, but I think in some ways, to me, this is almost an opportunity, because Hollywood is fantasy. It's not real world. And we must accept that. Most people, well, it seems though a lot of people see it as being truth, but no, it's fantasy. And we see we see a fire without smoke. We see fire without heat. We see fire that develops always over there, and not over there, all around them. And why? Because we've got actors and cameramen. And the studios owe a duty of care to those people. And they don't want to injure anyone, so it's not real life, it's fantasy. And in some ways that's fake news. And that's kind of current, social media-wise. So in some ways it's, to me, a little bit of an opportunity to raise the profile and say, well, this isn't real. Sprinklers don't do this. This is fake news. So I'll leave that with you. Looking at people are, we are people, and I think we can accept that maybe we don't all drive, and if we drive at the speed limit and things, corners get cut, just for example. Everyone is in their own world, and people don't actually do sometimes what you'd expect them to do. Fire engineering, a specialist area of fire safety, looks at asset and reset of the available time to get out of a property as opposed to the required time. So you want to get out in the time that's available. You want that bit of time available to be covering the time that you've actually got to get out. And there's a lot of psychology into startup times of people moving, and a lot of tragedies can be put down to people who've not reacted in the way that was anticipated, and they've been enveloped in the time that was there. An example of something that you probably be a little difficult to foresee, but the National Trust, they have a number of cottages across the country. They had one down Devon or Cornwall way, and it happened to be, I think, a family from London. They had a fire in the property. They didn't know about it until the fire service turned up. When the fire service turned up, grand blaze going on. They were fortunate to be slightly away from it. The fire alarm was blaring out. And they were asked, well, why didn't you get out, the fire? And they said, well, we always hear alarms in London. You didn't even think about it. I think, what? So and in that way, now National Trust make sure that people understand about the processes. So sometimes we only know things when things don't quite go as they should do. In the building regulations, there is Regulation 38 which relates to fire safety, and within that, the building should be built with regard to fire safety, and all of that information should be collated and handed over to the incoming responsible person. Yeah? Now, could I just ask a show of hands, who has come across a fire strategy? Brilliant. Yesterday we had contractors. We had 2. Yeah? And the contractors should be creating it. So that's marvellous. That's marvellous that you can do it. As a fire safety officer, I've never come across one. I've done audits and never found one. It just, there is a process which is not fit for purpose. It just doesn't seem to happen. There's one of the things that is often put about sprinklers is the cost, generally. But in some ways, that's part of the story. The other side of the equation is the value of a life. In this country, the value of a life is actually relatively low compared with Europe, and very low compared with America. So again, if you start off on the basis that the value of a life is quite relatively low, you're probably not going to be screaming and shouting and say, yes, sprinklers are the thing to go in because they are value for money. In building, we heard yesterday that the driver, and this was my experience, a big driver for the industry is cost and time. And those quality and the end user's experience of that building is much lower. And that seems to be something which is another one of these I'd say elephants in the room. I think there's an elephant behind the elephant. There are so many. And really, I'm just touching on a number of areas just to give you a flavour of my experience here. So what I think overarching all of this is that fire safety isn't really in the culture, in people's culture. And I say people, it's people individual and people organisation. Andy, when you started off, you told us about the fire exit and how to get out, and there wasn't going to be, and that's coming in, and this is a slow process, but that's brilliant, and that's a good demonstration of how things are moving forward. The future, well, post Grenfell, we know that there is a great groundswell to try to move this forward. Again, picking up on what Nick has said, in Scotland there's a private members bill, very much as Anne Jones did in Wales, to bring sprinklers in to care homes. That seems to have stalled slightly. Also, London Assembly, you may be aware that they are really pushing for sprinklers to be installed in care home and social housing. Allied to that, there's kind of a counter discussion document by the Association of British Insurers, who are saying it should be risk-based and it should be don't forget that introducing water can introduce another hazard. It's an interesting document. The future. So we have obviously Dame Judith Hackett, but really that's a stepping stone. That's not going to be the magic bullet. We'll have to see where this goes. But she is reporting to the government. Since Lakanal House, has there been much change? Since any other number of tragedies, have there been changes? Grenfell, yes, is a massive loss of life in one area. But we need to keep that pressure going, as Nick has said. In Scotland, they are doing the same. It's part of a bigger process, and it'd be interesting to see what they come up with as well. The question. And can we do this as a show of hands?
We can do both. Yeah.
Yeah, could we do a show of hands? And then I'll just explain why I've asked this. When fitting sprinklers in a residential flat, should they be fitted in the kitchen? You are so good.
I was hoping that was for A.
Yes, you're so good. Yes, you should. Why I asked that is because you may be aware that in Birmingham there was the council made a statement that they wanted to put sprinklers into all high-rise flats that they own. £31 million they estimate. In the last couple of weeks, Councillor Henley, he's a doctor, Councillor Henley, has put forward that a number of arguments against them, and which are based on dubious, how can I say this? Anyway, this was one of them. And he was saying, no, they shouldn't be fitted in kitchens. Because you put water into a kitchen, there's hot fat, and you're going to make a fire. Hold on, there is a fire. So why don't and he's saying this is a good reason not to put sprinklers into a kitchen. So it just gives you a flavour of what's out there. And he came up with a few other arguments which just kind of pushed the boundaries of disbelief. But thank you for your time.
Thanks very much.